What's up, Halo, and welcome back to the G to Gooseberry Inn. It's your boy Andor, and today we are here with another podcast. I am joined with Abel. Abel, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what we're here talking about today.
Hi, I'm Abel, and today we're going to be talking about Rudy Tooty Point Shooty. We're going to be talking about guns. It's a topic that I'm pretty familiar with. I spent about 2 years working for the state doing firearm background checks, so I'm pretty well versed in the laws, and I've personally carried and practiced with firearms since my 21st birthday 7 years ago, so I have a lot of personal experience with firearms as well.
Very nice, and that is stark contrast to me, who has... I've picked up guns before, but I have not owned one. So we're here today to learn what we can about guns. There isn't like... Well, there is kind of like a particular topic of it, but this isn't like closed to like any particular subject with guns, I guess, is a good way of putting it. But yeah, so Abel has some points that he'd like to talk about. I will do my best to entertain the conversation. As I once mentioned, I am not versed in this area, but I will do my best. But why don't we go ahead and start with your first talking point that you had, Abel? What's the first point that we wanted to bring up with guns?
So the first thing to talk about when it comes to guns is always safety.
Right.
So when it comes to firearms, there's three main rules for safety. The first is always consider a firearm loaded until proven beyond shadow of a doubt otherwise. Second is always keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. And for those of you who don't know, the muzzle is the end of the barrel where the bullet exits the firearm. And then the last rule, which I would personally consider to be the most important, is to keep your booger flickers off the trigger. Your finger should never be on the trigger unless you are at a safe shooting location and you are ready to fire.
That's good. I'm glad you bring some of those up. Oh, go ahead. It's my mistake.
No worries. When it comes to clearing a firearm, so that comes back to the first rule, consider it loaded until proven otherwise. And the way to prove that it's not loaded is to point the muzzle in a safe direction, then remove the magazine, and then open the action and inspect the chamber both visually and physically. So some of those words might not be well known. So the magazine, for anyone who doesn't know, is the device that you load into the firearm that holds the bullets. The action is the part of the gun that houses the barrel and the chamber. It's the part of the firearm that loads and fires and ejects cartridge. So point the muzzle in a safe direction, remove the magazine, and then you open the action. So for most semi-automatic handguns, that involves pulling back the slide, and then inspect the chamber where the chamber's where a round would go when the gun is ready to fire. So when you're making sure that it's unloaded, you're opening the action and inspecting the chamber to make sure that there isn't a bullet in there. And usually what I'll do is I'll pull back the slide, lock in place, and use my pinky to check to make sure that there's nothing in the barrel.
Okay, that's good. I want to take a moment to say, thank you for, using the terms for everything, too, because, I have a pretty good idea of what most of the terms are, but I think a lot of people do just kind of assume people know what the terms are.
Yeah, I actually went through and I grabbed a couple definitions of some of the parts and terms that I know, but I know not everybody does.
That's good. Yeah, that's definitely appreciated, I think. Okay, so on safety, I know this is one thing I'm super big with, like pretty much with all the rules you mentioned. These are what I try to keep in mind too. Whenever I am like teaching people about guns, that's the first thing I go over. So like a good example is when I went over to France, they have guns over there, but I don't think they, like, everyone exercises the same rules. So like the first thing you mentioned was like you should treat every gun like it's loaded, unless you know, like, with a shadow, like without a shadow of a doubt that it's not. But even then, like for me anyway, I still, like, I was raised to just be like, always treat it like it's loaded. Even if you know it's not loaded, just don't point it at people. But when I went over there, someone was trying to show me their gun, and that was like what they did. Like they just came at me with a gun. They just like pointed at me and they're like, look, here's my gun. And that was where I was just like, whoa, don't point that at me. They're like, no, that's okay, it's not loaded. I was like, I don't care if it's loaded or not. I just don't want you pointing it at me. They're like, oh, okay, my bad.
Right.
And I know that was one. Go ahead.
That's why rule number 2 is to always keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction.
Yep.
Even if it's unloaded, you still want to keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction.
It's just good practice, because like even if it's I do the same thing with knives. Like it's just like anytime I'm handling a weapon, this, like, always keep it like other safety in mind, because like with a knife, like you could walk at someone with a sharp end pointing at them with no intent of stabbing them, and you can still end up hurting them. And I feel like it's the same with guns.
Oh, absolutely. Safety's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. And what about like ear protection? Is that anything you have any info on, or like anything you'd like to share about?
So when it comes to ear protection, I kind of go overboard. I wear the over-the-ear muffs and the in-ear plugs when I go shooting, so that my hearing is definitely protected.
That's good.
Because with the over-ear muffs, you know, if they're not sitting properly, or if you're outside and you're wearing sunglasses, then the earpiece from the sunglasses could get in the way. So I think it's a good rule of thumb to just be extra cautious when it comes to your hearing. Especially because, you know, you might be going out to the range to shoot a really low caliber gun that's not very loud, but you don't know what anybody else is bringing. They might be shooting a hand cannon the next stall over, and if your ears aren't protected, you'll go deaf.
That is actually very good advice. I hadn't even considered that. Like, what are other people bringing? Always prepare for the worst.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even consider that overboard too.
There's almost...
Oh, my mistake.
Well, no worries. In my experience, there's always some idiot at the range who's brought their really overpowered rifle or hand cannon that just every time they pull the trigger, it sounds like a bomb went off next stall over.
Yeah. One of those never fails. Every time you go, you always get that idiot right next to you.
Yep.
That's unfortunate.
It never fails to make me jump either.
Yeah, I know that's one thing that's like super overrated, because like we talk about all the other ones, but like in all honesty, I think the other ones, like all the other safety rules we talk about, we consider those all very heavily, because those ones like actually could put someone's life in danger. And I think the ear protection one is one that we kind of take for granted. Like a lot of people don't think about that, but it's because, like, you know, they're worrying about the other rules. They don't realize like how important your hearing is and how easily you can damage it with something like loud noises.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, eye protection is also very important.
Ooh, okay. That's true. I don't know much on this, so if you'd care to enlighten us at all.
Yeah, typically I'll just wear a pair of safety goggles. You just basically want something between your eyes and the environment, because when you're shooting semi-automatics, for instance, every time the trigger's pulled, that's ejecting really hot brass, and if it bounces off the wall and hits you in the eye, you can go blind.
That's true. My sister had a situation where that happened once, where it's the only time her fiance ever yelled at her, because she was pointing a gun down the range, so like properly, and then hot brass like went down her shirt, and it startled her, and she screamed. Ooh. And she, you know, like, she didn't like take care of the gun basically, so she like moved it and like aimed it at her fiance, and that's the only time he's ever like actually yelled at her, because like that's dangerous, and that was just like unfortunate circumstance on her part, but like that hot brass you really got to be careful with.
Yeah, whenever you're going shooting, that's another thing to take in, to keep in mind, is what you wear. You don't want to be wearing loose clothing. You want to have clothing that brass isn't going to get trapped in.
Yep, nice and fitted at the top. That's a very good point. That's one that she learned that real quick though, because of how angry he got at her. Which, like, I think, because I still feel like in her situation, like her mistake was her apparel choice, but it's a novice mistake. But like he was rightfully upset because like she absolutely just like swung a loaded gun like right in his direction.
Yeah, that can be very dangerous.
It's very fortunate she practiced the what would you say, that keep your booger pickers off. It's a good thing she did that as soon as she was done firing.
Flickers off the trigger.
Yeah, yeah, I like that one. But she fortunately did that, so like, you know, that definitely minimizes the risk. She, like, the moment that hot brass like touched her, she took her finger right off.
Yeah, that's good. Among nerds like me who are really interested in firearms, it's called trigger discipline. Knowing, you know, to keep your finger off the trigger at all times, other than when you're ready to fire.
For those that don't know, like, what are good resting positions for your finger, instead of the trigger?
So, generally, when you're using a handgun, the best place is along the frame of the gun. So, you're basically making a pointing motion with your hands, and your fingers just resting on the side of the gun. That's still the same for long guns like rifles and shotguns, but sometimes the frame doesn't permit that as easily. But generally, having your finger on the side of the gun away from the entire trigger guards is best.
That's good, because I know I've seen some people, like, even they rest their finger just like in the trigger guard, and I know that's a big no-no. Like, you shouldn't even be doing that.
Yeah, you want to have your finger away from the trigger so that there's no chance of you accidentally pulling the trigger.
Okay, that's really good to know. All right, any other like good general safety tips or advanced safety tips before we move on to the next part?
The only other thing with safety is gun storage. When you're not like actively carrying a firearm, it should always be locked and stored safely. So what I mean by stored safely is you want it to be unloaded.
Cock and ball tortured. Thank you so much, Jobson.
And it should be, my rule of thumb is there should be at least 2 mechanisms between someone who wanted to gain access to the gun and the gun. So what I do is I use a gun lock that basically it's long, not really sure what the term would be, but the locking mechanism, you slide it through the barrel and then lock.
Welcome, Yobson. We're learning about guns today.
So that prevents the gun from being operable. And then I also put it in a box that I lock with another padlock. So there's always 2 steps between accessing that gun.
I see. That's good. I had not considered that for storage, because I mentioned Dave pre-stream, but I myself do not currently possess guns, so all of my knowledge is just like on the range, but like when it comes to like storage and safety, that I do not have much on. Here to lurker bait until you crash. Welcome, yeah. Kiwi. Also,
it's definitely also advisable to store the gun and ammo separate.
Ah, good point.
So when I'm not actively carrying my gun, it's locked with a gun lock inside a lockbox, and then all of my ammunition is stored in a separate locked container.
Okay. That is something I think I've heard before, but I didn't commit that to memory, to be honest.
And generally, if you're like traveling with a firearm, you want to have that same setup where it's in a locked container, but it's the law to have it to have ammunition stored in that same container.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a reason behind that?
I'm not sure. It comes down to a federal law from.
That's a good question, Yobson. I'll ask him in a second.
But it was basically a law that was passed federally that made it legal to transport firearms, provided that they're in a locked container separate from ammunition.
Okay. Let me see. Yobson has a question. So I guess this would depend. You'd probably only have one gun for this if I'm not mistaken, but Yobson asks, what if I need quick access to the gun in an emergency?
So if you need access to a gun in an emergency, generally that's why I have one weapon that's always on my person. And then when I'm going to bed, I have they make a lot of different boxes like this where it's just a little lock box that has either a hard key option or a fingerprint reader that just you touch the fingerprint reader and it pops open.
I like the fingerprint. That's cool. That's good. So because that's what
in that instance I don't have the 2 steps because it's just my firearm in that container, but that's the gun I'm always carrying, so
right. That's a really
like that when I'm asleep.
That's a really good point to bring up, Yobson, because I didn't even think about that. So for your like general gun like containment, that's where you would suggest the 2, we'll say, what's the word I want to use? The 2 deterrents to get to the gun, but then you have one gun that you have easy access to. But that it's easy only for you to get access to, not anyone else.
Right.
Okay, that's good. I like that.
I guess the differentiation there is between guns that you're actively carrying and guns that you aren't. So the only gun that I store in that fashion is the one that I'm carrying every day. All of my other guns are stored with a gun lock in a locked container.
Okay, good. That's great advice. Does that help you at all, Yobson? That's good. I actually like the idea of the fingerprint container too. All right. Any other last thoughts on safety? This is good. This is a big topic, and I'm glad this is one that we can take as much time as we need to cover safety because it's important.
Absolutely. I think I covered all of the points I had, unless there's anything you want to ask about or talk about, or if chat has anything.
Yeah, we'll give. I don't personally have anything right now, but if chat has anything, let us know. Definitely. We'll give people a minute to see. I know Kiwi stopped by, but she did say that she's going to lurk until she crashes, so she will be here, but she will not be here.
Okay.
Sorry, no, don't be sorry, Kiwi. That's not a problem. Like, that's what I do during your streams. Like, don't feel bad. You are struggling? No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. You're not obligated to do anything while you're here. Oh?
Yeah, sorry, I just had a thought.
Oh, let's hear it.
Another point with safety. So, I know in the state of Utah, and I'm sure in
What did the boy get you,
other
Santa-kun?
states have similar laws, but in
Was it
state
the
of
D&D
Utah,
magic thing?
It's illegal to carry a firearm or use a firearm under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
Oh.
And in the state of Utah, the determination for alcohol is the exact same statute for driving under the influence. So here, if you have anything above 0.05 blood alcohol content,
Oh, congrats. We'll have to play Monster Hunter then.
have a firearm on you that's against the law.
Okay. That I did not know. That actually does answer a question I was gonna have, or I had. It would have been for the future, but I'm guessing people don't drink and shoot like they do fishing, huh?
No.
Yeah. Okay. It's probably for the best.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah, I believe it. I don't know anyone personally that's ever mentioned doing that, so that was just like a question that popped in my mind. I was like, do people do that? Like when they like people go fishing, do people drink and shoot? But no, yeah, that's actually good that there's laws in place for that. Also, welcome Santa-kun. Congratulations on Monster Hunter Rise. We'll definitely have to play that together. But it looks like chat doesn't have any other questions or anything on safety, and we can of course always revisit it. That's always a good topic to come back to. So if you would like to start with your next point that you have.
Okay. Next, I was going to talk about carrying firearms, just kind of in general.
Okay.
So, obviously, the laws vary from state to state, but in the state of Utah, we do allow open carry and concealed carry of firearms. So, the names kind of are kind of self-explanatory, but the difference is, you know, if you're open carrying, it has to be visible. Like there can't be anything obscuring the firearm if you're open carrying, versus concealed carry, it has to be concealed. And you can actually be charged with brandishing if you're carrying a concealed weapon and then you try and show it off.
Okay. The Kiwi has a point to make. Well, first of all, Santa-kun just stopped by to lurk and tell us news. Yeah, thank you so much, Santa-kun. Thank you for the lurk, and congratulations. Have fun playing the game. But Kiwi did say the number of incidents Schaefer told her about with stupid gun injuries when he worked in the hospital in Brigham City is Jesus fuck. I can only how much worse it would be with alcohol. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of gun-related injuries that could have been easily avoided with just adhering to proper safety.
Absolutely. It's honestly like that's probably, well, I'm not gonna say that would be me pulling numbers out of my ass, but I'm not gonna say how many injuries I think are caused by guns that could have been preventative, that were like unintentional in general.
Yeah, I imagine it's probably close to 90%.
Yeah, that's kind of the number I was going for, but I honestly don't know. I don't have like statistics to back that up. That's just because I know how people work, and I know people tend to be pretty dumb, and they tend to make big uh-ohs like that.
Kind of on the topic of carrying and safety and injuries, one of the key things to think about if you do decide to carry a firearm is having a proper holster.
Right.
I know that in like films and such, there's this tendency to just throw a loaded firearm in your waistband, and that is a terrible, terrible thing to do.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's a good point.
You definitely want to have a proper holster that fits the firearm and covers the trigger guard completely. That's the safest way to carry.
I don't know like how much info you have on this, but I do know there are people out there who are they're like really into their holsters for their carrying, like maybe not as into the guns as, or maybe they're not as into the holsters as they are into the guns that they're using to carry them, but sometimes it feels like that. Like I know some people are really serious about what holsters they use.
Oh yeah, I actually am too. There's a lot of different holsters out there. So there's a lot of different options. Generally, they fall into kind of 3 categories. There's holsters that are made out of neoprene, the same kind of material that like wetsuits are made out of.
Right.
And those are generally really easy to conceal because they conform more to the shape of your body and your clothes. But they're not very sturdy, and they can be a little uncomfortable because there's not much between your body and the firearm. And then the middle ground is holsters that are made out of leather, and that's generally what I prefer. It's rigid enough that the metal from the gun isn't digging into your body, but they're soft enough that you're not just replacing the rigid body of the gun with the rigid body of the holster digging into your skin.
Right.
And then the last one is the most protective, is holsters that are made out of a kind of plastic. Typically it's a plastic called Kydex. And generally, for concealed carry, Kydex is probably more than what you'd need. It's more overkill. Because generally, if you're carrying concealed, it's underneath your clothing, so it's not rubbing up against stuff all the time. But like, if you're open carrying, so their holsters are made out of Kydex.
Oh, I think I'm lagging. This will
ruin the integrity of.
Dang, I'm lagging. This will be on the recording, but on the actual stream.
Still there? Oh no.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, now I'm.
Said there was a network error.
Okay, now I think I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry about that. It cut off when you were at the tail end of talking about leather holsters.
Okay. So leather holsters, it's the middle ground. It's more comfortable, and it's slightly less protective than the next level up, which is holsters that are made out of plastic.
Right.
It's typically a type of plastic called Kydex. It's a polymer that's very strong, very rigid. And generally, a Kydex holster is really only advisable if you're open carrying, because you'd want that extra protection so that if you're rubbing up against something, or if something hits your holster, it's not just going to destroy it. Like, that's the kind of holster that law enforcement has, because they have to have their firearm carried openly, and they need something that's going to stand up to bumping into things and scraping against things without destroying the holster.
Very, very common wear and tear, basically.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I guess how do I want to word that? So those are the three types, and you mentioned you like leather specifically. I'm sorry if you mentioned this like during the time when it cut out, but like what are all of the points why you specifically like leather holsters over the other two?
So I prefer leather over kydex because I'm not going to open carry. I will never open carry, and I just don't have the need for that extra protection on the holster.
Okay.
And then I prefer leather over neoprene because it's rigid. You know, it's formed to the gun, so it holds the gun better. It's more secure. Like if I'm running or jogging, it's not just gonna fall out. But
Okay.
it's also more durable than the neoprene. Like I had a neoprene holster a while back, and just from years of putting my firearm in the holster and taking it out, I had worn out the neoprene to the point where it was just falling apart.
Oh, that's crazy.
Whereas I've had the same leather holster for probably 10 years now, and it's still in great condition.
Okay, so my next question actually is on something you mentioned. So you will never open carry. Now, I know there's like, I don't know how to put that. This is one of the things where like my ineptitude and my general lack of knowledge is going to come in, but I understand that there are more, from what I've heard, please take this with a grain of salt, there are more negative connotations with open carrying than concealed carrying. Is that true, or like what are your thoughts on that in general?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely true, and personally, I would say rightly so.
Okay.
I think generally, if your job doesn't require you to have your firearm carried openly, like if you don't work in law enforcement or armed security, there's no reason to open carry. It is just a bad idea. Simply from the standpoint that generally speaking, carrying a firearm, right, you're carrying it for protection.
Right.
But if you're open carrying, if something happens, like let's say you're at the 7-Eleven and someone comes in to rob the store at gunpoint, if you're open carrying, they see that you have a gun, and if they're planning to shoot somebody, they're going to shoot you first because you're the person that they can see has a gun, and it's just a bad idea. Not to mention, open carrying just is, it's generally regarded as a douchey thing to do. Like, people generally view open carry folks like they're just a bunch of gun-toting lunatics.
To be honest, that was the point I kind of wanted to bring up earlier when I had initially mentioned I feel like it had negative connotations, is because that's how I heard people see people who open carry. And I'll be honest, like I kind of feel that way too. Like if you see someone with a gun, it's at that point it's no longer about protection like you mentioned before. It's more like a display, it feels.
Yeah, it's just they're trying to show off, and I think that's really stupid. And that's a really bad attitude to have about firearms. It's not supposed to be some jewelry that you're showing around in public. It's a tool used for defense.
I see. That's a really good point, that I'm glad we talked about that, because that's something I'd always thought and like I've heard, but I never knew why. So thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have any other points on carrying in general?
I do, actually. So currently there are 24 states in the Union that have what are called constitutional carry laws. And basically what that means is they allow their citizens to carry a firearm concealed without a permit.
Oh,
Utah,
okay.
last year we became one of those states. And there are still instances in which getting a permit is recommended, but there are 24 states, and next year there will be 25 when I think it's Alabama's law goes into effect that those states allow people to carry a concealed weapon without a permit.
Okay. And like, what's the? I can guess, but what? Like, I can guess how people are going to be. But what's the general like consensus on this idea? Like, is this like, do people generally like this, or is this something people?
Oh, it's super divisive.
Okay.
There are a lot of people that think that it's the greatest thing and that it's part of their Second Amendment rights and blah blah blah. And then the other side is this is a ridiculous trend that has been happening over the last 10 years that needs to stop. And personally, I fall into that camp. I think that every state should allow their citizens to get a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
Right.
But there should be a process to get that permit. It shouldn't just be anyone who's over the age of 21 can carry a concealed weapon. I think that's not the way to go at all.
I think that's right in line with like how I feel on that too, because like we mentioned before, like if I were to get a gun, that is actually one thing I would have no problem doing. I wouldn't mind like getting a permit. I wouldn't mind going through like any process like that. Because like I think if I were to use a gun for self-defense, it would be like in that sense, like I would like to have a gun that I could like have concealed, and I think I would get a permit for that anyway. Like even if it's not like legally required for me to, I think I still would, just to go through the process and make sure like everything on my end checks out.
Right. Yeah, and I would definitely recommend that as well. But you mentioned, you know, if you were going to carry, I have some very strong opinions on who should carry a firearm. You know, obviously in this country we have the Second Amendment and everybody has the right to carry a firearm, or at least the right to have a firearm.
Right.
But I feel that the only people that should actually be carrying a firearm are people who have taken the time to fully process and prepare themselves for the implications involved in carrying a deadly weapon. Because if there ever comes a time where you do have to use it, you have to know long before that happens, you have to know that you are going to be okay with potentially ending another person's life. You know, it could be entirely justified. It could be, you know, if you don't shoot this person, they're going to kill you. But that won't change the fact that your actions cause the death of another human being, and that's not something to take lightly. That's a very heavy burden to carry. So I feel that if you're not prepared to accept that burden, you just shouldn't carry, because you're going to hesitate when the time comes, and that can cause a lot more damage than if you had just not been armed in the first place.
I think you bring up a very excellent point there, because that particular issue is something I've asked people about, because people can talk about it in jest and in theory, like the idea of taking another life for like you said, any reason, justified or not. But I wonder how many people are actually prepared to do something like that. And to be honest, I don't think many people are. And the other point you bring up is really excellent too. If you are in a position where you have a gun and you are carrying, and there is someone who they have a gun, the bad guy we'll call them, and they are putting someone else's life in danger, if you pull out a gun and you are not ready to make that decision and you hesitate, you could honestly just exacerbate the situation, because now not only are you injured / dead, but now the bad guy who has the gun, you've just made things worse for them, and maybe they are actually hurting people now, where before they might not have done anything, but because you were unready, or you were not ready to make those next steps, you've now made the situation worse.
Exactly. And on top of that, if in that situation you draw and you hesitate and they kill you, now they have another gun.
That's true. That's very true. That's a good point. This is stuff that like I'll be honest, I'm aware of, but I didn't like put two and two together to this degree. That's because like when you said, like, I'll be honest, when you first said like I have very strong opinions about like who should and shouldn't carry a gun, part of me was worried because it's just like what are situations where like we could like justifiably feel like yes, people shouldn't have a gun, but this is absolutely like you shouldn't be carrying it if you are not ready to make this decision. Because then, to be fair, if you are not ready to make that decision, and if you're not planning to do that, then you kind of fall into the category of that douchebag that we talked about earlier, who just has a gun to show it off. They don't actually plan on using it for self-defense. They're just like, look at this shiny toy I got, and that's it. It's a piece of jewelry to them.
Yeah.
Kiwi says word.
And
Word Abel.
you know, you don't necessarily have to fall into that of people like me who have, you know, gone through this and thought about it a lot just to own a gun. But I definitely feel like this is something that everybody should consider at length before carrying a gun.
Yeah, I think that's it. That definitely will make me think about it before, if I even decide to get a gun or carry it. Something I had not considered. I'll be honest, let's just say right now, if I get a gun, I won't be carrying it for a bit, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility. And I really wish that's another reason why I think it shouldn't just be constitutional carry, that permits should be required. I think there should be a lot more education that goes into it. I really wish that in order to get a permit, you had to go through some form of course where they make you think about this kind of stuff and consider whether or not you actually feel like you should carry a gun.
I agree wholeheartedly, actually. I think that's a really good point. And yeah, like I see why like the people who are opposed to the constitutionally protected carry. I see where they're coming from with that, because like you're right, like not everyone is ready to make that decision, and it just will exacerbate most situations.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
And then if you do decide that you want to carry, then there's even more stuff to consider.
Oh, let's hear it.
You know, if you're gonna carry a concealed firearm, it's not one size fits all. For instance, my everyday carry firearm is a Glock 17. It's a full-size pistol that is frankly going to be it's going to be too big and too hard to conceal for people who aren't as large as I am. So that's another thing to consider. You know, if you do decide to get a gun, if you do decide you want to carry it, you have to take into account like what kind of gun do you want? How feasible is it to conceal? Do you want to get a semi-automatic or a revolver? And there are pros and cons to either. And then the most important thing to consider with any gun that you are going to carry is it something you're comfortable shooting? Because if it's not, you shouldn't be carrying it.
That's true. That is a very good point. I don't have much on that. That's honestly just really good information. I don't have like much I feel the need to clarify.
You know, for people who don't want to carry a gun like on their person in public all the time, and they just want to have one at home for home defense, I would say don't even get a handgun. Just get a pump action shotgun. You don't have to train as much with it. You don't have to go out to the range and shoot every month to be proficient with it. You just have to point in the general direction, and anything in that direction will be obliterated.
That's true.
Plus, you don't even necessarily have to shoot a pump action shotgun. The sound of racking a shotgun is probably enough to scare off most would-be burglars.
That's true. That's enough of a deterrent for them to just be like, no thanks.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's kind of what I figure too, is like, that's like, if I were to get a gun for home defense, it would mostly, I would like anyway, ideally in the perfect world, for it to mostly just be a deterrent. Ideally, I would like to not have to use it. But that is one case where, yeah, that I think would be more beneficial, is if it just scared them off.
Yeah. And in pursuit of that goal, I think the pump action shotgun's the best way to go. It has a very loud, very distinct sound when it's loaded.
I've already learned so much about like all the stuff I wanted to with guns. We're off to a great start here. All right, what do we have next?
Let's see. I actually made a PowerPoint on firearm laws. I have like a 33 slide PowerPoint on just the various laws of firearms and carrying firearms.
Oh.
Mostly in Utah, but also federally. So we could go over a bit of the laws, or I have more information on different kinds of guns for carrying and the pros and cons. You know, what's the most reliable gun? What are the pros and cons to semi-automatic versus revolvers? What caliber is best?
You know, we have a lot of lurkers right now, but like, let's open that up to chat. Like, which one of those like sounds good? We have like general laws for guns based on state, but mostly Utah, and then we also have like guidance on what like gun to pick for carrying. We'll open that up and we'll wait like a minute and we'll see. And if not, then we'll default to the one I want to hear, which is which gun to pick for carrying. I'm interested to hear on that. But we'll give chat a moment to answer, see if anyone wants to hear anything different. And I'm going to take a swig of water while we wait.
Oh, what a good idea.
Yes, hydrate. Delicious. Oops.
Some good water ASMR.
I know you can hear it a lot better in VR than you can on my stream, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let me double check. Okay, time's up. Let's go ahead and go with option numero 2.
Okay. So, when it comes to carrying a firearm, generally you're talking about a handgun. So the first choice to make is between semi-automatic and revolvers. So for anyone who doesn't know, a semi-automatic gun is a firearm that when you pull the trigger, it has springs and a feeder ramp that pulls the next round from the magazine and puts it directly into the chamber. Whereas a revolver has multiple chambers, and when you pull the trigger, it rotates to the next one. And there are various pros and cons to either one. Obviously, for semi-automatic, you're gaining the option of carrying a lot more ammunition. So, for instance, my Glock carries 17 rounds plus 1 in the chamber, so I have 18 rounds of ammunition in that firearm, versus my revolver is only a 5-shot revolver, so it's a pretty significant difference. And typically you're not going to find a revolver that has more than 6 chambers, at least not one that you could feasibly conceal. But with revolvers, you never have to worry about a jam. Because with a semi-automatic, there's a lot of moving parts. So there's a lot of different ways that something can get stuck. And then you have a failure to feed, or a failure to fire, or a failure to eject. So that's not necessarily something that should scare you away from semi-automatics. It just requires more training. So you just have to train to be able to clear a jam so that you're not left defenseless in the event that your gun jams. And then with revolvers, generally speaking, the ease of shooting is much harder with revolvers. They tend to have a lot more kick, which causes the muzzle to rise when you fire a round, so you have to be proficient at bringing the muzzle back on target. Whereas with semi-automatics, generally the difference in the amount of gunpowder used and the barrel length lends itself to there being less recoil, and so they're easier to shoot. And then, it also comes down to personal preference. Like, I'm much more comfortable holding my Glock than I am my revolver, just based on how the grip feels and how it feels to sight the firearm downrange. So it mostly comes down to personal preference, but when if you do go with the semi-automatic, there's more training involved in being proficient with that weapon in the event that it jams.
That's a good point. I was unaware of that.
Yeah, and the easiest way to do that is to so there are these things called snap caps. They're basically just dummy rounds. And what I do to train for jams is when I go to the range, I'll load my magazines and I'll put a couple snap caps just randomly in each magazine, so that when I'm firing, I'm guaranteed a simulated jam, basically. So I have to clear the firearm. Basically clear the jam so that I'm ready to continue shooting.
That's really clever.
That's probably the best way to train for that.
Yeah, I would imagine
Especially if you load your magazines like the day before or a few days before going shooting. That way you don't remember where any of the snap caps are, so it's as random as you can make it.
That's a good point. It's kind of like pulling a prank on yourself, but in a productive way.
Yeah.
I just want to take a moment to say I love that for this we have Zhongli giving us such good gun advice. This is definitely top 10 moments in all of my streaming. Zhongli gun advice.
Yeah. GeoDaddy talks about guns.
That'll probably be the name of the podcast. We'll see.
Pretty good.
That would be. All right, but yeah, sorry, I digress. Go ahead.
No worries. So, after you've decided between semi-automatic or revolver, then there's the question of caliber. And that's changed a lot over the last 30 years. So, in 1990, the FBI realized that they didn't like the 9mm round because it wasn't penetrating as well as they needed it to, but they also didn't like the 45 because of how few rounds they could carry. So in 1990, the FBI developed the 40 Smith & Wesson, which was kind of the middle ground between those two. And for about 15 years, the 40 caliber Smith & Wesson was the best round to put in the semi-automatic handgun. But that has changed since then. So when I first purchased a gun for carrying, I got a 40 Smith & Wesson because I knew about that history and I thought that was still the way it was. But with modern ammunition, 9mm rounds actually have very comparable ballistics to 40 caliber and 45 caliber. And that's basically been achieved by developing better cartridges, better gunpowder, so that the velocity of the 9mm makes up for the fact that it's a smaller bullet. So now 9mm is pretty comparable to 40 caliber and 45 caliber, so it's generally the best caliber to go for with a semi-automatic handgun, because 9mm is way more affordable than either of the other two, and since it's smaller, generally you can have more rounds in the magazine.
That's very interesting. I know.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
The only time I would recommend 45 caliber is if you're living out in the wilderness, like if you're living in Alaska,
right?
Because you want something that's gonna be more. The velocity is less important than the what's the mass? The mass of a 45 caliber is more important in that situation, because you're not just worrying about potentially having to shoot at another human who's trying to kill you. You also have to consider shooting at wildlife that's trying to kill you.
Big old bears, yeah.
Yeah. Like when it comes to when you're up against a bear, you either want a 45 caliber full metal jacket or you want 44 Magnum revolver, because they anything smaller is not likely to stop bear.
It's like anything smaller, that's like shooting spit wads at a person.
Yeah, basically.
You'll make them more angry than anything.
Yeah, but living in an urban environment, 9mm is the best caliber for semi-automatic. And for revolvers, there's kind of two. So there's 38 Special and 357 Magnum. The rounds themselves are very similar. 357 Magnum is just slightly bigger. And the only real consideration between the two is the gun that you pick. So a lot of guns that shoot 357 Magnum will also shoot 38 Special, but not the other way around. Smaller guns will only shoot 38 Special, and they won't be able to fit the 357 Magnum. So it just depends on the kind of gun, the kind of revolver you want to get. If you're going to go for one that only shoots 38 special, or if you want something a little bit bigger, it'll be a little harder to conceal, but also shoot 357 Magnum. And the ballistics on those are also very similar, but 357 Magnum is a little bit more powerful of a round.
Okay. Oh,
sorry.
no, you're fine. I was just gonna interject and say, like, I know I planned on learning a lot, but I didn't plan on learning this much. This is great.
And when it comes to a carry weapon, like one that you're carrying every day, in my opinion, one of the most important factors is how reliable it is. So, for handguns, semi-automatic handguns, Glock makes the most reliable handgun by far. And then for revolvers, it's Smith & Wesson all the way. And obviously, there are a lot of other manufacturers that still make reliable guns. So, you know, if a Glock just doesn't feel right, it's not something you're comfortable with. Smith & Wesson makes, I think it's called the M&P Shield series, that's generally compact 9mm handguns that they're also very reliable. So there's more options than just, you know, one Zhongli's opinion on what's the most reliable, but
right.
there's a reason that Glock has stood above the pack in terms of reliability and affordability for so long, and Smith & Wesson has dominated the revolver market for a long time.
Yeah, I know this one gun knowledge lacking Itto. I've definitely heard a bit about Smith & Wesson, that's for sure.
The only thing excuse me. The only thing I wouldn't recommend is the 1911s. If you walk in a gun store, you are pretty much guaranteed that at least 75% of the people in there are going to be 1911 nuts. And I don't understand it. Like, if the year were 1935, then yeah, the 1911 was the best handgun available on the market. But the year's 2022, and they just have not kept up. They're just not as good. And they're generally all steel frame, whereas Glock, the bottom half of the frame of the gun, the bottom half of the gun is made out of a polymer, so it's much lighter. If you're going to be carrying a gun all day, you don't want to be carrying something that's full steel, because it's going to drag your pants down all day and it's going to be obnoxious.
Yeah, I can see that being very tedious to deal with. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just reading my notes to see if there was something I missed.
Oh, okay. You know, I wasn't gonna say anything much, but it's just like that is good, like, to know. I know, like, I've fired a few Glocks and I really like how those handle. Like, once again, through my very inexperienced personal experience, I do like Glocks, and I like. We were talking about my 9mm earlier. I have never fired a semi 9mm, but I've fired revolver 9mm, and those are actually really fun. They're cute little guns, I think.
Yeah. One other reason why I personally prefer Glock over a lot of other guns is they're really easy to take apart. Because a gun that you're carrying every day gets dirty even if you don't shoot it very often. And it's really important to keep your carry gun clean and in good condition. So if it's something that you're going to be carrying every day, you're going to want to clean it often. And if you're going to be cleaning it often, it might as well be something that's not a pain in the butt to clean.
Good point, actually. That kind of goes back to something you said like earlier, about making the choice in what to clean to, or it's just like the gun that's the best fit for you. That's another thing I think a lot of people don't think about is maintenance, like what it takes to take care of that gun. I think a lot of people just like, oh yeah, this gun's cool, or I like this gun, it has X and Y, but they don't realize like it's a pain in the ass to clean.
Yeah, I would, even if you're not carrying, even if you just own guns to hunt or to shoot recreationally, I would always recommend cleaning your guns at least once a month and after every visit to the range.
That's a good plan. I know that's part of the fun for some people. Like that's my sister's fiance. That's one of the big reasons he likes his guns. He likes the upkeep. He'll go out and he'll shoot them all one day, and then all next day he'll just spend time cleaning them.
Yeah, that's a good habit to have. So I don't know if you heard about the recent Supreme Court ruling on concerning guns.
I did, but to be honest, I might have forgotten.
So let's see, it was this one, the NYSRPA v. Bruin. So this was just a couple months ago, or no, last month. The Supreme Court ruled. So this case concerned the constitutionality of New York State's law that basically it required applicants who wanted to get a license to carry a concealed pistol to show proper cause. They basically had to, I think the law specifically said they had to display a special need distinguishable from the general public. And the court ruled that that law was unconstitutional. So it's still very recent, but generally people seem to agree that what's going to happen is states that were previously may issue states are going to trend towards shall issue. And the those terms, basically, the difference is when it comes to a concealed weapons permit, states that may issue concealed weapons permits can essentially deny permits for any reason, and states that shall issue have outlined in law what the reasons you could be denied a permit are. And if you don't meet those reasons, they will issue you a permit.
Interesting. So, do we have an example on a state that is a shall issue, and what some of those like red, like you will not get it, like what those reasons are?
Yeah, so the state of Utah is shall issue.
Okay.
And the state of Utah's law says that you can be denied a concealed firearms permit if you have been convicted of a felony, convicted of a crime of violence, convicted of an offense involving the use of alcohol, convicted of an offense involving the unlawful use of a controlled substance, convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude, convicted of an offense involving domestic violence, adjudicated by state or federal court as mentally incompetent unless that adjudication has been withdrawn or reversed. And if you are prohibited from possessing a firearm in the first place, they'll also deny.
Okay, I mean that's a bit of a bigger list than I thought it was going to be, to be honest. Before I ask any questions on it, though, what complications do you see between the differences of may issue and shall issue, if any?
I actually think all states should be shall issue anyway.
Okay.
I think may issue turns it into kind of a good old boys club where you have to know somebody to get a permit.
That's a good point.
That is really unfair. It should just be like how the state of Utah is, where the requirements are outlined in statutes showing what is basically unacceptable in order for you to obtain a permit. And I think for the most part, Utah's law is a pretty good list of things that prevent you from getting a permit.
Yeah, those all sound really fair to me. In fact, when you first mentioned like what a shall issue was, like I thought for a moment where you said like the reasons are outlined, that made me wonder if like may issue just they can really do it for like give it to you or not give it to you for whatever reason they want. There doesn't have to be like a legal rhyme or reason, which that I wasn't sure if there were any positives to it, but that one, yeah, it's just like if you're a part of the clique that has guns, then you're in. Otherwise, you have a really hard time.
Yeah, or like with New York's law, where you have to show a special need that exceeds the general public. Like, that's a really weird way to term it.
That's kind of
living in a certain part of New York City gives you a need that's greater than the general public.
That's true. When you mentioned that too, I did think that was like a strange law for them to try to pass, because that's very well, I mean, it brings up the same issue. Is it like the need can, because I'm pretty sure it's not just like they have to just bring up a special need and then they'll get the gun. I'm sure there's someone who can determine if that need is relevant or not in order for giving the permit.
Exactly.
And that could, once again, discrimination could absolutely come into play with that.
Yeah, it's super arbitrary, and it shouldn't be. It should be very clearly written out in law what is and is not acceptable.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'm glad it's. That's the good part, is I think like for the most part we're on the same page with a lot of the stuff, but I'll be honest, like I don't have much of an opinion on guns. I just know the safety and the bare minimum for them, and then I have an idea of how I feel like people should carry guns. I'm gonna grab another swig of water also, if you want to take a moment and do the same.
Sure.
I'm gonna have some more drinking water ASMR. Whoa, there's my hip tracker. Good thing you guys couldn't see that. Only Abel saw it, but the camera's on him right now. I'll make it fair. Where is it? Come on, you. Oh my god. I will get this. There we go. Oh no, we're almost out. Water reserves running low. Alrighty. What do we got next, Abel?
The only thing I have left is the laws. It's honestly pretty dry. I made this PowerPoint when I worked for the Bureau of Criminal Identification, and I just updated it with some of the more recent stuff. But it's all very dry. It's a lot of legalese. So I was gonna say, if you'd like, we could call it if you don't have any other questions, and then I'm happy to post a link to the PowerPoint for anybody who wants it.
You actually read my mind with that. What I was going to suggest is if you do feel it's dry, if you would like, if there are any laws you would like to cover that you find interesting or that fascinate you or that you think might be interesting to someone else that are in there, we would obviously love to hear about them. But also a link in the Discord would be very helpful, because I know that I will find myself with some extra time this weekend, and I would love to learn about like all the different laws that the PowerPoint has to offer.
Yeah. So there's really only one that I wanted to touch on, and it's mostly just because it's a law that just passed. So on June 25th, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was signed by the president, which enacted it into law after it was passed through Congress. And it's a huge bill, like they all are now, but it has two major components that relate to guns. So the first bit is it expands background checks for anybody who's trying to purchase a firearm under the age of 21. That background check now must include their juvenile criminal history.
Oh, okay.
Which I think is great. The state of Utah has been including juvenile criminal history, I want to say since the 70s. But this act basically expands that to all 50 states. You know, any firearm background check has to include the juvenile criminal history if the person purchasing it is under 21.
That is actually kind of reassuring.
Yeah. I imagine that particular piece of the bill was introduced after the Uvalde shooting.
I was going to say, yeah, I feel so as well.
And then the other thing that this act does in terms of guns is it closes the so-called boyfriend loophole. It was basically a gap in the law that prohibits people who are convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence from getting a gun. So previously that law only prohibited a person if they were current or former spouse, parent or guardian of the victim, or a person with whom the victim shares a child in common, or a person who is cohabitating with or who has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse, parent, or guardian. So that the way the law was written before, it didn't include it didn't include your boyfriend. You know, if you were dating someone and you never lived together and you never had children together and they got convicted of domestic violence against you, because of how the law was written, they wouldn't have been prevented from getting a gun. This new law now includes a person who has a current or recent former dating relationship with the victim. So it closes that gap in the law.
That is good. That is reassuring, because that's a very, I'll say, a very large group of people these days, to be honest.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm surprised that it's taken this long. Well, I'm surprised that it's taken this long, but I'm also not, because of how effective our legislature is.
That's fair. I was gonna say, like, yeah, that it seems like it should have been included, but when you look at the history of how things are done, it's just like, yeah, okay, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, those are very interesting laws. But yeah, if you would share that in the Discord, I know myself and other people would definitely be interested in reading it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me get some stuff closed up here. But all right, yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. That was good. Now it's actually, this is the first time in a while I've had a podcast like this where it was very a lot of people were lurking, because like I don't mind when people like talk a lot, and I don't want to discourage anyone in chat from talking during a podcast, but the focus is obviously me and the person that we're with. So that's actually great that we had so many lurkers here today. So thank you guys. Thank you for just being here to listen to the information Abel had to share. All right. Any last minute thoughts, questions, concerning comments?
I've got nothing.
Got nothing. All right. Right on. We will look for someone to raid real fast. And unless Abel, since you're the guest, did you have anyone that you would like to raid?
I don't think so.
Okay, then let's take a peek-see. Who we got? We got the black. We got a Kai Fox. Let's go raid a Kai Fox today. We like a Kai Fox. All right, I'll get that set up. If anyone's listening, please let the Kai Fox know. I'm sorry I won't be there when she starts streaming, because, or when we raid, because I will be in VR. But yes, we'll go ahead and send everyone over to her. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Abel. This is a very informative conversation we had. But yeah, we will see you guys next week, and have a good one. Make better choices than me.